Okay, so with me being done and wrapped up doing the Don Blue stuff and trying to find something to talk about, I decided I wanted to crack into this Toxic Avenger box set and review all these movies. And I do want to review all the Toxic Avenger movies. Now that unfortunately that may not be possible, and I'll explain why in just a second. But today we're going to be talking about the original, and then we'll talk about part 2, part 3, and 4 at a later date. So the reason I say it may not be possible is I have this. I can review all 4 of these original movies, but I can't review the newest one with Peter Dinklage because essentially what I've heard from reporting via Inside People is that they're not really sure if they're going to be able to release that movie, which makes no sense to me at all because after watching this movie, like, it can't be worse than this movie. And this is not a bad movie, but yeah, yeah, I wish I could review that one and cap off this review series, but unfortunately I'm not going to be able to. So, what is the Toxic Avenger? If you don't know, since this is a weird, obscure thing that's, is popular, but also is not. Basically, the Toxic Avenger is an 80s franchise that was created by Troma. And Troma is this company that would make these very low-budget movies that they were exploitative, let's say that. They'd have, like, lots of violence, sex, other things that, like, are meant to shock you and make you feel disgusted in some ways. And they're like a counterculture movement of films, basically. They're kind of an interesting encapsulation of that time period, because so much of the 80s was involved with the, like, satanic panic and so kind of other things going on at the time. And so when you deal with this kind of counterculture movies that is trying to be exploitative, gross you out, make you feel a certain way, it's just really cool. And so there's a certain group of people that really latch on to that stuff. That's, Troma still exists today, right? But not in the same way, essentially. Like, they don't make the movies. You don't go to the theater and sit in front of a screen and see a Troma logo pop up like you would in the 80s. They still release movies via streaming in other places, but Toxic Avenger was their biggest hit. And I think it's pretty easy why. Because I think this movie not only lives on now, and I think in some ways is actually influential to modern superhero movies. I'll talk about that in a minute. But I think Toxic Avenger is the most easy one for you to show somebody, be like, what the fuck, because a lot of their films are just kind of like not as easy as to enjoy. This one is. Like, I enjoy this one. It's pretty easy to watch and pretty fun. This movie is really gross. Like, there's at points where I almost vomited. I'm very sensitive, though. Keep in mind that. But essentially, the plot of the Toxic Avenger is, like, you get this nerd who you really hate, right? And they bully him into falling into a vat of acid, and then he becomes the Toxic Avenger, this weird mutated superhero. Ends up saving the day, getting the girl. And I think this is also really fun because it's a great subversion of a couple things. Obviously, it's a subversion of superheroes, right? It's a goofy parody of superheroes. This is a really wacky and bizarre version of superheroes. And I think that's why I think it endures now, because it's like, we have the superhero boom, and this movie is kind of making fun of that a little bit. Not as much as I think some people make it out to be, but there's some influence, I think, that, maybe some modern superhero parodies are maybe taken from the Toxic Avenger, like The Boys and things in some ways. Not in the same way, right? But I also think it's just really funny, like, But I think the other thing that it parodies really well is like movies like Revenge of the Nerds, because basically in Revenge of the Nerds, you watch that movie, and you know your main character is this nerdy guy, and he gets the girl and all that stuff, and that's kind of what those movies were about. And this movie, this nerd, you hate him at the beginning of this movie. He is a freaking weirdo. He's gross. Um, you know, and then not so much that you want to see him bullied in the way he is, but at the same time you're kind of like, bro, you were being a creep, so you kind of deserve this a little bit. Not exactly what happens to him, but it's just kind of like, all right. And so I think it like does it. I feel like this movie's kind of a weird parody of like nerd movies of the '80s. That because back in the '80s they were trying to give like nerd power, where now it's like it comes across a little more naturally than it did in the '80s, because nerds portrayed in media are like the kids in Stranger Things. Like, they're nerds, like they play D&D, but they also just function like characters, and they have like they can just talk about their thing and be normal. Where like in the '80s people don't really understand nerds, so they're like very exaggerated, and this movie's also exaggerated because of that, but also making fun of that. It's a lot of fun. It's very gross, very violent. And you don't watch these movies for great acting or anything like that, but I think there's a lot of fun to be had in this first movie with that kind of like parody aspect to it. It's really goofy, and yeah, the 4K looks pretty good as an upgrade. It's a pretty nice addition, I should say. Just want to mention that. But yeah, next week we'll be talking about The Toxic Avenger 2, tracking down toxic troubles from Tromaville from Tokyo, which is interesting type. But let me know your thoughts. Like, share, and subscribe.